Hey guys, Bailey here, and in today's video I'm going to be covering one of the most requested video topics that I've been receiving, and that is what gear I use to thru hike with a dog on the Continental Divide Trail. So some of the topics that I'm going to kind of divide everything into include our big three: foot care, food and water, first aid, and then just other miscellaneous items that don't fit into any of those categories. If you're looking for something specific, I will put timestamps down below, that way you can skip to that section that you're actually looking for. So as far as big three goes, first things first, of course I started out this trail with my trusty Big Agnes Tiger Wall UL2 that I used on the San Luis Loop with the dogs, and switched after about 4 days to the Hyperlight Mountain Gear Ultimate 2 and ended up using that tarp setup the rest of the trail. So the biggest reason why I switched was just to cut weight. My pack was way too heavy for the first 4 days. I just realized I didn't want to carry all that stuff to Mexico, and the Ultimate is about half the weight of a freestanding tent like the Big Agnes Tiger Wall. So the other kind of pro is it's made out of Dyneema, which is part of what contributes to it being so light. The other thing with that is when it gets wet, it doesn't sag like a Sin nylon type tent would do. And it's just a very simple tent in general, kind of like the next step for us as far as our backpacking skills go. There are some very specific things with this setup, which makes it probably not the right choice for everyone, especially if you're hiking with a dog. The first thing is that I chose not to use the inserts that it comes with. I used it as just a tarp style setup, which means that this basically did not have a floor. The good news about that is that I didn't have to worry about the dogs ripping a kind of sensitive tent floor. I see a lot of people really concerned about that. You know, I could just throw our tent down anywhere. I didn't have to worry about it. The dogs could go in and out, wasn't an issue. Of course, the con to that is if you don't have total vocal control of your dogs, then that could be an issue because they could just escape whenever they want to. I did have to spend about a week kind of setting those boundaries with the dogs, that they are not allowed to just go under. If you want to come in the tent, you have to come around and come in through the door. But then they were fine the rest of the trip and it wasn't an issue. They never tried to leave in the middle of the night, to the point where we could actually also cowboy camp. And that's obviously not the case for every dog out there. One thing I was kind of worried about with this tent that you might also suspect, but never ended up being an issue, was that it uses your trekking poles to make a center pole since it's a pyramid style tent. I was really concerned about the dogs rolling into it and knocking it over and collapsing the tent on us. That actually never happened because it's staked out, and you know, with trekking pole tents you have to stake it out for it to be standing. It kept the pole very solid, so even when someone bumped into it, it never ended up falling down, so that was a good thing. So yeah, that is the Hyperlight Mountain Gear Ultimate 2. So the next kind of part of our big three would be our sleep system. I chose to bring along a Costco Black Diamond throw quilt. This is what I've been using with the dogs for quite some time now. It's been working just fine for us. I don't think Costco necessarily sells them anymore, but you can still find them or similar products online if you look for them. Basically, it's just a giant rectangle quilt thing. I really don't know the temperature grading, but it would be hard to come up with some sort of temperature system for dogs anyway, since it really varies based on the amount of hair they have, size, if they're adapted to cold climates like your northern Spitz breeds, or if they're like a desert breed or not. So this seems to work okay for my dogs. Might work for some people better than others. The nice thing that I like about it is it's pretty versatile and pretty large, so I could use it theoretically. I have used them for different things. I can wrap the dogs in them, just lay it down flat, what have you. And then really in the summer and in the warmer months, that's the only thing I use. I do think going forward for shoulder season backpacking that I will probably add some straps. That way if it's really cold, I can put the straps on Prima to keep it from falling off of her in the middle of the night, rather than using a dog coat. Skittles sleeps inside my quilt if it's too cold, so that's not really an issue, and that would fix that problem. This would be similar to like your Groundbird Gear turtle top quilt, which is gaining a lot of popularity. I just think since we already have this and it's working well and it's a bit bigger, might as well keep it, just make a little adjustment, and then it'll be good to go for future uses. As far as the pad situation goes, both my dogs are pretty hardy. Typically don't use a sleeping pad for them in the summer. I did pick up an MLD Mount Laurel Designs Eva Goodnight, which is very similar to the Gossamer Gear Thin Light. Used it for the first couple days, sent it home with the intention of getting it back for Colorado in the colder weather, which is what I ended up doing. I also found a 4-panel Z-Light when we were in Montana, and I packed it on my pack with the intention of just packing it out. and ended up just keeping it and using it for the dogs. So really, they probably had a higher R value at the end of the trip than I did because I stacked them together. Going forward, I'll probably continue to not use a sleeping pad in warmer months, and I'll just have to kind of decide what I want to do in shoulder season. I'm not sure if I would still use both or just pick one or the other, or kind of what I want to do going forward on that front. You seasoned backpacking experts know that the third part of our big three triangle would be your pack. I did not have either of the dogs wear a pack. I've discussed that pretty extensively in other videos, but more of the stories just contributes to our success. It just works best for us. So no pack on their front. I do have a ground bird gear pack. They just don't wear it through hiking. And then I carry all of our gear, so the dog's gear and my gear, in a Hyperlight Mountain Gear Southwest 2400 pack. Would like to bump that up to the 3400 size next time I have some extra cash lying around to throw out in your backpack. The reason I mention that is just because in my observations of other people attempting through hikes with dogs, a lot of people end up sending their dog home because their dog started out wearing a pack, then they started getting footsore, so the person started carrying all the dog stuff, and then that just didn't work for whatever reason. Either because it was too much weight. I've seen people where like the person's pack couldn't handle the extra weight from the dog. So that's just something to keep in mind. I liked the HMG pack because even though I overload it almost all the time over the 40 pounds that the manufacturer recommends, it stood up really well. Started to get a little sad looking at the seams, but that's after almost 4,000 miles of pretty heavy use. So I feel like that is pretty good, and something to keep in mind when you're picking your own pack if you're through hiking with a dog is, can you carry your dog's weight in this pack if you needed to? Next kind of major thing with the dogs would really be foot care, and I carried a lot of different things for foot care, probably more than I needed to in some ways. The first thing that I think is super important is you're going to need to figure out some sort of nail care routine. Some dogs wear down their nails when they're through hiking, but a surprising number don't. I discovered on the San Luis Loop that my dogs don't. Their nails were the longest they had ever been in their whole entire lives when we finished that trip, because it was self-supported, so I couldn't get a new pair throughout the trip. So they went like a month and a half without having their nails done. I did carry nail clippers on this trip, and I tried to use them once a week. I got kind of bad about that at the end, but obviously nail clippers, you don't need to recharge like a Dremel. So that's just what worked well for us, and I'll continue to do that in the future. And that's important because having long nails can change like the shape of their foot. So as far as like their pads getting sore, it can affect that, and it can affect boots, which we'll talk about in a minute. But as far as like additives to their feet to try to help them toughen up, I used a couple different things. I did use like a paw wax. So I used Mushroom Secret, and then I also used like a homemade marigold based salve that one of my dog friends gave me on and off throughout the trip. I tried to use it in especially dry climates for Prima. She would get cracked feet just like I would get cracked feet. I didn't really notice the paw wax making a big difference as far as how tender and sore she would get. She could have paws that looked perfectly fine as far as cracks and stuff went, but she would still be tender on certain environmental areas like granite, pavement roads, that kind of thing. Skittles never really needed it after her foot issues got resolved in Montana. Her feet were really tough the rest of the trip. The other foot product that I used on the trail is called Tough Foot. I feel like this actually helped better than the wax as far as Prima's feet and being tender went. Mostly in Wyoming. For some reason I stopped using it, and I'm really not sure why I didn't order more. Part of it was probably just because, one, that's definitely something you'll have to order from Amazon instead of buying in a pet store, and two, that stuff smells horrible and it's really leaky because it's a liquid instead of a like salve. So I did have to keep it in a baggie. The original one I got was pretty leaky. However, that is definitely the first thing I'm going to try on our upcoming through hikes, is getting that and using it before we start hiking instead of during the hike, and see if that makes a bigger difference on the foot front going forward. So because Prima did have so many foot issues, we used a variety of boots. Skittles had some too for emergencies and to try to get her feet toughened up at the beginning. We started off with the mushroom boots, which you get from places like dogbooties.com, or you can make your own if you're okay at sewing. I've used these pretty extensively in the past. The biggest issue is that they're much more for snow conditions and keeping snow out of feet for sledding dogs, so they wear out really fast. Even when you get the highest denier product, they still they wear them for 2 days and there's holes in them, which there's going to be true of almost any dog boot. They're really not as tough as like people shoes, which is kind of bothersome, but they definitely wear out the fastest just because it's thin fabric. I did notice too that the boots definitely make Prima's dew claws very sore. I tried a variety of things to try to fix that. Have not been successful yet on that front, although I do have a couple more ideas. The other kind of thing is there's not a lot of padding in them, and I think a lot of Prima's issues are the same issues that I have with my feet. I think her feet just get sore from just constant abuse of hitting hard surfaces. My feet get very sore on road walks, her feet get sore on road walks, so I think something with more padding would be helpful going forward. I did also use boots from Ultra Paws. I had never heard of this brand before, but my dog friend that gave me the Marigold Salve also gave me these boots to use. They're becoming much more popular. I've seen them at like Murdoch's and stuff. There was a bit more padding, they're a bit tougher, there's 2 straps. They did still rub her dew claws. At first they rubbed it into her leg like the mushing boots. Eventually that stopped happening and it started rubbing on top of the dew claw and made that sore. So I still had to be careful with using them. They were also a bit floppier, I think harder to walk in. They were probably a little bit too large since I didn't buy them specifically. So pros and cons. I think there's still a lot of room for improvement in this area, and I'm definitely doing a lot of research and trying to find a better boot solution for Prima with her dew claws, because I do think that no matter what, she's probably going to need boots of some kind going forward. So as far as food and water goes, of course the first thing would be bowls. That's what the first thing I think of anyways. We started out the trip with 2 super fancy Dyneema dog bowls from Ground Bird Gear. Super lightweight. I think they were less than an ounce, or like 0.3 ounces or something like that. I don't know. Very, very light. Kind of small as far as putting Prima's food in it. It just all barely fit, but it worked well enough. I had 2 total, so I would use the same bowls for food and water. One thing I really liked about these bowls is not only were they light, they were very packable. So they like scrunched down super small. I could just shove them in some pocket in my backpack so I could like reach it later while we were hiking and not have to worry about it disappearing. Also did not get as gross as some of the fabric bowls that I've used in the past. Overall, I really liked it. My biggest complaint is just because it's seam sealed. After a while, they started to kind of leak if you left water in overnight. Was not a concern if you're just giving water and they drink it right away, but if you're leaving it out for longer periods of time, that does happen. Did lose one to the wind in Wyoming, which, pro tip, if you're gonna leave one of those bowls out overnight, especially if you use a bottomless tarp, put some rocks in it, then that won't happen. But anyways, last one in Wyoming, had to replace it, needed a new one, so I just got a fabric roughwear bowl while we were in Steamboat. Ended up just using that the rest of the trail because I didn't want to spend money on a new one. It worked just fine. It held water better overall, but obviously larger, heavier, not quite as packable. Got the job done. Nothing against them, but there's definitely some other ones I'm going to be trying out, so I guess kind of keep an eye out for that. Probably doesn't matter, it's only a couple ounces, but yeah, that's dog bowls. So on the food storage front, I primarily used the Ursack XL, which could fit about 4 days of people and dog food in it. However, with the dogs, an extra thing I brought that I would not have brought necessarily if I was hiking without them was the Z-Packs Bear Bag Kit with 2 ropes. So I did bring that for overflow food, so if it was more than a 4-day resupply, I'd put the extra in there and do a 2-tree bear hang at night to obviously keep it out of our camp. And then the other kind of major use for it was that if all of our food would not fit in my backpack during the day leaving a town, then I would end up carrying it in my hand in the Z-Packs bag like a purse. So I've met very few other people that have ever done that, especially with dogs. Might not be the answer for everyone. It worked well enough for us. We made it from Canada to Mexico. I'll probably keep planning to do that in the future for big carries, just because it's going to be inevitable in the kind of places that we hike, and with a big dog and me carrying everything. As far as water goes, an extra water storage that I wouldn't have carried without the dogs. Really just brought an extra 1-liter smart water bottle for dog water, and then definitely at least 1 extra platypus type bladder, about 2.5 liters. For first aid supplies, I'd really say that a lot of the things that are in your first aid kit you can also use for your dogs. Always make sure that you bring things that you actually know how to use, otherwise it's not helpful to have it in your kit. I did have some very specific dog items in my first aid kit. The first would be dewormer, just because they eat all sorts of weird things on the trail. The second would be flea and tick medication, like a topical. I just did that in June and July because I found 1 or 2 ticks. Not super common in the Rockies, but one of the vets we saw just recommended it, so we did that. I brought very specific bandaging materials that most people probably wouldn't bring, like vet wraps, Nuanis tape. I don't think I brought Elasticon on this trip, but I did bring some extra gauze pads, gauze wrap, just in the event that one of the dogs got a laceration on their paw or something, then I could wrap it. I brought some extra Stipic powder just to stop any bleeding if there's ever a major event. And then I also was able to get some Rimadyl for the dogs, which is like the dog version of ibuprofen. Don't ever give your dogs ibuprofen, by the way. Metronidazole, which would be if they have like major explosive diarrhea. And then our vet that we saw in Helena prescribed a whole bunch of extra tramadol for Skittles. However, since then I've learned that tramadol is not actually effective in dogs, which kind of aligns with what I just saw with the dogs. I never really saw it make a big difference in how they felt, but we did also have some of that. The last kind of thing that I had that was more for the dogs than for me was some lidocaine wound gel, just to kind of numb any pain and any superficial wounds that they got. As far as miscellaneous items that were dog specific, of course, anytime you leave the house, you take poop bags, right? I did end up switching to burying their poop the large majority of the time, but I still carried like eco-friendly compostable poop bags. That way, if they pooped somewhere where I couldn't bury it, like somewhere rocky or close to a stream, I could pick it up. And then of course, when we were in towns and I can't bury there, then I could pick up their dog poop. Just responsible thing to do. The other thing is I don't think I would have brought the umbrella. I'm glad I did. I used it for other things than the dogs, but definitely when I'm hiking with the dogs in these arid areas, I like to have an umbrella just because I can open it, plop it in a bush, and just make some shade more than there would be for the dogs. And I did use that for them in Wyoming. Even though I didn't use the umbrella this way on this trip, in the past I've also used it to protect the dogs from rain and hail and some of Colorado's, fast moving monsoon type thunderstorms. So that's another pro to having an umbrella. I also used it when my raincoat wet out, so that was nice too. My dogs are pretty darn spoiled. I brought a toy for them that I carried, lost it right away, so then I bought them a new one when we were at Stemple Pass. They didn't play with it all that often. I've just put it out, but they did quite a few times. So they did like having it. They would play with it some. Our friend's dog played with it. I just think it's nice for them to have something fun too. Just because you're hiking doesn't mean grooming stops. It makes a big difference as far as how they stay warm and that kind of thing. Prima started blowing her coat when we were in the middle of Wyoming. So I tried to find a place like a self-dog wash, but there weren't any in any of the towns we were hiking through. So I ended up just buying a rake type brush when we were in Rawlins from the Tractor Supply there. And then I just brushed her as much as I could over the next few weeks to get all that dead hair out, because that really makes a big difference with double coated breeds like German Shepherds as far as their heat and cold regulation. So when it's hot, if they have all that dead hair, then they can't keep the cool air in close to their bodies as well. And the reverse is true. If it's cold, they need all that dead hair out so they can trap the air and keep it warm next to their body. Skittles has a different type of coat. She has a wire coat that has different grooming needs. So you might have noticed if you watched our vlog videos that her look changed. At times she was much fluffier than at other times, and that's because I have to do this thing where I just basically pull out the guard hairs. I have a harder time maintaining it. I'm not very good at it. So eventually what happens is she gets very fluffy like she is right now, and then I just take all of the wire hairs out and just let it grow back. So as far as leashes and collars go, I did make my own leashes at the beginning out of some paracord and some climbing type carabiners. So I took a carabiner, took 12 feet of paracord and basically doubled it back on itself. That way, if I needed to use it for something, I could, which I did. I used it to help Prima across some of the bigger fords in the bob. Most of the time I just kept it at 6 feet though. The nice thing about those leashes is I could wrap them up really small and just clip them to my shoulder straps in my backpack. So they're out of the way since my dogs hike off leash 98% of the time. And then if we were in town or in an area where they required leashes, I could just get them out and put them on the dogs. The downside is Skittles got pretty tangled up in one of these leashes in Pie Town. I think it was much worse than it would have been if it was just a regular leash because the paracord is thinner. So I'm not sure if I'll keep using these going forward or not. They're really nice on trail, but I really did not like that aspect. So that's something I'll need to balance, is maybe think about how I want to do that going forward. As far as collars go, I don't use anything special. My dogs don't chew through their collars or leashes or anything. I just use ones that I think are cute or that we've had for a long time. I made sure to put tags on them that were up to date as far as my phone number, a phone number for someone that was not on the trail with me, you know, because you don't have cell reception on the trail. And then I put that they're chipped. And then I also put that they're CDT through hikers. That way if something happened, someone could, you know what we're doing and be able to contact someone that actually has cell reception. You shouldn't just rely on their rabies tag. Make sure that you keep a picture or downloaded version of their rabies certificate on your phone, or like print it out with all of your important documents, just because that is actually what like officials need to see if there's ever a case where you need to show proof of rabies. The tag is not valid. Of course, if you have any other records, especially if your dog has any health problems, definitely keep access to those too in case you need to go to the vet. Obviously, for most emergencies, for most things, you're not going to need anything more than probably just a rabies. But if you're planning on boarding, like doing the AT or something, then you'll need your records to board your dog if you're doing like the Smokies or something. We didn't ever board them, so that was never an issue. But I did make sure that the dogs got boarded Tele beforehand. I'm going way off in the weeds here, so let's get back to the next thing, which would be clothing. So my dogs did have clothes. When we were in the southern part of the winds doing the Circa the Towers alternate, it rained for like 2 days straight, and that was the first time where it rained and then the temperature started dropping to about freezing at night. Normally when the dogs get wet during the day, if it's raining, it's so dry here in the Rockies and arid, and they both have nice coats because I maintain them with grooming tools, that they just kind of dry out and it's not an issue. They don't get cold at night. I do also bring like a pack towel that I use for myself and the dogs, and I can use that to kind of dry them off a little bit if need be. So that would be another dog item. But once it started getting to the point where it's getting down around freezing at night, I knew it was time to add in some clothing for the dogs. So I did purchase some Herta rain blockers and had them mailed to myself and Steamboat. Basically, the purpose of those was to keep them dry during the day if it was precipitating, be that rain or snow. We used those quite a few times throughout Colorado, and then once it got to the point where it's obvious it wasn't going to do that anymore in New Mexico, I mailed this home. The other thing that I got were the Herta warm-ups. Those were meant to be a base layer for sleeping at night to help keep them warm if it was cold. I didn't feel like they really worked all that well in that situation, for us anyways. Maybe they work for other people. I just got the impression that they'd probably work better for exercising, like in the videos they show dogs doing agility wearing them or whatever. My dogs don't need a warm layer for the kind of hiking that we're doing during the daytime. I just need something for at night, so I don't think we'll use those going forward. I think instead I'll just plan that Skittles sleeps in my bag when she's cold, and that seems to work fine. We share heat. And Prima, if I can add straps to her quilt to keep that on top of her, I think that will cover that base so they don't need a warm layer. As far as the rain blockers go, I'm trying to decide if I want to keep those or not. Of course, they're a bit heavier than some other options. I know some people use frog togs for their dogs, or like a trash bag with a hole for the head and that kind of thing. But I did like that the rain blockers were pretty sturdy, much sturdier than I think a lot of those other options are, especially for the kind of hiking that we're doing. So I'll probably keep using the Herta jackets, but I don't think we're gonna need them on any of our upcoming through hikes anyways, but they're just kind of nice to have. And honestly, the dogs look super cool in them, so that's plus two. So I'm pretty sure that's everything dog specific. Of course, there's a lot of things in the pack that gets used for everyone, so it's kind of hard to like draw that line sometimes. I do have a comprehensive list of all the gear we used on my website, so I'll link that down below. And if you have any questions that I didn't answer about our gear, I'd be more than happy to answer them as well in the comments. So I hope that answered all of your guys' questions about what gear I brought and why, and we'll see you in our upcoming videos and our upcoming adventures.